Hello, everyone. Well, there's no uncertainty about what the number one issue in the country is, and it's inflation. Over 90% of Americans are extremely concerned about inflation or somewhat concerned about inflation. We already know that some of the most reputable economists in the country have said that the bill that passed back in March is the principal reason for the raging inflation that we have. And now we have reputable economists who actually support BBB, liberal-leaning economists, who say that if BBB passes, it will only exacerbate, only make worse inflation, not only this year, but next year.
I think we've seen now for the past 10 months or so what Democrat governance looks like, and it's one crisis of competence after another. Whether it's what's happening, the disaster at the border, at the ports, the pileup out there, what's happening in our cities when it comes to safety of our communities. You can literally go right down the list and just see example after example of where Democrat governance is leaving the American people high and dry. And as the leader pointed out, the most obvious example of that is probably inflation. They passed a $1.9 trillion bill in March, and that has fueled these inflationary pressures. Instead of listening to what the American people are saying about that, their reaction to it, which I think the generic ballot, which shows the Republicans with the largest lead in 40 years, the Democrats seem to be covering their ears and just trying to ignore the problem, because what they're talking about with this reckless tax and spending spree is flooding the zone with even more spending, more dollars, chasing too few goods, leading to more and higher inflation. And just give you an example of what that looks like year over year, October to October, highest inflation rate in 31 years, 6.2%. But if you look at some of the basics that the American people buy, eggs, poultry, fish, meat, 11.9% increase October to October, all being fueled by the policies that Democrats have already passed and those that they're talking about trying to pass in the future. The Congressional Budget Office is going to come out with a score at some point, which I don't think is going to be particularly favorable to the Democrats. And the Democrats continue to maintain that all of this spending, all this massive run-up in spending, costs zero, as if the American people, if that could pass the laugh test with the American people. And so the taxes, the spending, the debt, all contributing to what the American people perceive to be the biggest economic issue that they face with their families, and that is this runaway inflation and the impact that it's having on their weekly budgets. I don't expect the Democrats to get the message, but surely the American people are sending one, and the message that they're sending is do away with this massive, reckless tax and spending spree and start getting inflation under control so we have more to be able to take care of our needs and our families' needs.
And with regard to inflation, this will be the most expensive Thanksgiving for the American people in the history of the country. You know, who would have believed that in just 10 months, Joe Biden could take us to a 30-year record high of inflation? Front page of the New York Times said the cost of a Thanksgiving dinner this year will wallop your wallet. ABC Nightly News reports that things are going to be up all parts of Thanksgiving dinner, from the turkey to the pie. So if you're a family living on a fixed income, somebody struggling to get by, it's going to be a lot harder to have a successful Thanksgiving the way you would like to celebrate it. The Wall Street Journal reports that due to the supply chain concerns, you're going to be fortunate if you can even find the items you want for your Thanksgiving dinner. This is Joe Biden's America. And we haven't even gotten to the part of getting to grandmom's house. On average, 50 million Americans take to the roads for Thanksgiving. The average cost of a gallon of gasoline is now up $1 per gallon from what it was when Joe Biden came in office. And what did the Secretary of Energy do when they asked her on national television, what are you going to do about the cost of energy? She laughed. She said that was hysterical. Hilarious, she said. Well, maybe hilarious to her, but not to the people all around the country who are suffering with this high level of inflation. And now they want to pass this reckless tax and spending bill, which is going to clearly raise taxes, clearly increase prices that people pay for things, and also increase the national debt. And this is the reason that only 1 in 5 Americans believe that under Joe Biden, the country is heading in the right direction.
Well, there's so much focus on the other side of how many new programs they can come up with and how long they can extend those programs into the future, that there's not been the kind of focus we've got to have eventually on how do you fund the government. I think there are two big obstacles apparently to moving forward. One is deciding what we're going to do to have a defense number, a spending number that meets the number one obligation of the federal government, which is defend the country. And two is not to go back and relitigate things that the Congress has decided consistently for years. I read just last week Democrats saying, well, the Republicans want to put all kinds of new report language in these bills, and that's just not true. In fact, in the last 10 years, most of which we were in the majority, no new report language was put in the bills, at least not in the most controversial of those bills, which is the Labor, Health and Human Services bill. The language we have to see in that bill is the language that every single Democrat who's ever voted for an appropriations bill has voted for. You know, the Hyde Amendment has been in the appropriations bill now for 45 years. OSHA exemptions for small farms have been in the bill for 45 years. OSHA exemptions for small businesses have been in the bill for 45 years. NLRB farming exemptions have been there for 45 years, and in one form or another, they've been there for 73 years. The Weldon Amendment's been there for 16 years. An amendment that Barbara Mikulski put in that I supported a decade ago on better ways to deal with part-time labor has been there for 10 years. Nothing added since then. These bills clearly can't pass without that language in there, and it's not in there in the bill that the House has voted on and sent over. We need to get realistic about what has to be in the bill, and then we have to get realistic about the top line numbers and move forward. I think it's going to be very hard now with everything Democrats have put out there on their agenda to have a permanent spending bill for the year that began October 1 of this year by January 1 of next year.
Inflation is really hitting our Iowans very hard, and I know this is true across the rest of the United States. It's already costing more for them to fill up their tanks with gas. We've seen it now at the grocery store with the cost of food increasing. So we know that this is probably going to be the most expensive Thanksgiving we have ever seen in the United States. And then beyond that, just in the last couple of weeks, Iowans have switched their heat on. We are now in the winter heating season. So not only were Iowans struggling to decide whether they fill up their tank full with gas or purchase that food for their family at the grocery store, now they have that additional burden of expensive heating for their homes. We are putting the most vulnerable Americans at risk. But what do we see the Democrats focusing on? This high tax and spend bill that just passed out of the House. And in that bill, they actually provide tax cuts for wealthy coastal elitists, while middle Americans will end up paying more for their taxes to support that plan. I think the Democrats have moved so far away from understanding the needs of people in our communities. They need to refocus on what's really important right now, and that's focusing on these inflation issues and bringing it all back to the family household. They need to let go of the pie in the sky and focus on what Americans need right now.
Last week, as I traveled around the state of Florida, the first issue everybody brought up was inflation. Whether it's gas prices, food prices, home prices, everything's gone up. The poorest families are the ones that get hurt by this. The people on fixed income can't afford this. And the Biden administration has no plan. They ought to get somebody in the White House that understands economics. If you spend extra money through government, you're going to get inflation. And that's exactly what the Democrats keep doing. So we're going to see more and more inflation. It's going to hurt more and more families. I think every manufacturer I talked to last week has seen double-digit cost increases in the last 12 months. Double-digit. That will be passed on to consumers eventually. It's going to hurt families all across this country, but the most is the people that are on fixed income or the people that don't make a lot of money. I watched my mom struggle to put food on the table. I watched when they turned down the heat at night, or turned off the heat at night when I was growing up because they couldn't afford it. That's going on all across this country.
Jeff.
What do you expect on December 3rd? Do you expect a shutdown? Do you expect some sort of an interim agreement here? Is that something that you would live with, or is there an effort by Republicans to force Democrats to accept something that has the old Trump numbers for a longer period of time, especially on the defense side?
Well, what I anticipate is that we won't shut the government down. That we'll somehow, as we always do in these situations, or almost always do in these situations, is work out an agreement. Otherwise, I think on the issue that Senator Blunt was focusing on, I think we're looking at a continuing resolution into potentially sometime next year if we can't agree on these provisions that have always been carried on a bipartisan basis in the government funding bills.
Given the blowback that the infrastructure bill has gotten from the right, and that just 13 House Republicans voted for it, and you were just in the minority of Senate Republicans voting for it, did you misread where your party is on this issue by voting for this bill?
Yeah, I've watched each of the two previous administrations struggle with the issue of how to meet the infrastructure needs of the country. 75% of the American people support infrastructure, unlike the other issues we're talking about. I joined 18 other Senate Republicans feeling like now is the time to address it. The infrastructure bill did not raise taxes. It did not revisit the 2017 tax bill. From a Kentucky point of view, it was extremely good for our state. I'm proud of my vote, and members were obviously free to choose how they wanted to vote. And in the Senate, 19 Senate Republicans felt it was the right thing to do for the country.
Leader McConnell, on the debt limit, Democrats say the October vote established that Republicans have an obligation to let them raise the debt limit on a regular order. They say they don't want to do budget reconciliation as you called for. What's your response to that?
Yeah, well, we'll figure out how to avoid default. We always do.
Leader McConnell, why was it important for you to disinvite the former president to Biden's inauguration?
Oh, I'm not going to revisit what happened earlier last year. What we're talking about now is this administration, what it's doing to the country. That's what the American people are focused on, and that's what Senate Republicans are focused on.
Leader McConnell, in the NDAA,